and we don't chop off the first part of your presentation. Okay. Okay. So welcome everybody to Tim's presentation, moving from Word to DITA using Oxygen. My name is Amanda Patterson. I am your host for this session, and I am going to be assisted by Bobby Werner, our incoming STC treasurer, Madam Treasurer. I've been waiting all morning.
We got our math wrong yesterday, but we won't talk about
that. In the chat, I have put in my contact information, Bobby's contact information, and some contact information for Tim, our presenter. If you folks would like to, if you have any difficulties, please feel free to reach out to myself or Bobby. Please also feel free to @mention Tim on social media. And as always, please use the hashtag STC_Spectrum 2021 so that we can collect all of your wonderful tweets and messages and posts across social media. I believe Tim will ask for questions as we go through, and please feel free to use the chat. Bobby and I will be monitoring that, and at opportune moments, we will try to interject those to Tim, or we will loop back around and catch those at the end of the presentation. And with that, I will turn it over to the man of the hour. Tim, it's all you.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for coming out to my presentation for the inaugural dry run, well-rehearsed run of moving from Word to DITA using Oxygen. And this sounds very specific, but given the product titles in the title there, but it's really more of an exercise of moving from unstructured content to structured content. The tools add some specificity, but it's general enough that it can be applied to anyone using DITA versus any other content source. So about me, here's my standard picture and list of too many things that I've done. If you squint, you can see the word sucker written across my forehead here because I have signed up for every single committee possible in STC. I am currently on the board of directors as the secretary. I do book reviews for the TechCom Journal. I did a whole bunch of chairs of committees that is really long and boring, but it made a lot of nice bullet points to fill up this slide. I used to be the president of the Philadelphia Metro chapter, where I was also their webmaster and everything else. I'm also an STC fellow. So if you have any questions about STC, let me know. So I'm going to talk first about the legacy documentation, where my group was coming from. And this is the new Oracle Redwood slide presentation, which is an interesting color scheme that we're all adapting to at work. And I thought I'd give it a shot for this presentation. So if you see too many swirls, I apologize. So first up is Microsoft Word. When my group was acquired by Oracle back in 2005, it was an internet startup, in the 2000s, and my group makes logistics software. So it's software used by the shipping industry to route trucks on their deliveries. Like FedEx would use that to help deliver things to your door, as well as putting things in containers in China, routing it onto the boat, putting it off the boat onto a train, driving the train across the country to a distribution center, to a truck, to a warehouse, something like that. It calculates all of that. And it was bought by Oracle in 2005. And Oracle is a very, very large company. It has maybe 130,000 employees all over the world. And some things are very centralized and other things are not, especially in terms of the acquisitions. So when you're acquired, they say, oh, what group are you part of? And my group got put into a group of all these other acquisitions. So we didn't have someone saying, oh, here are the documentation tools Oracle uses, because every group did something slightly differently, especially the acquisitions. And if anyone has ever tried to do this, it's not always an easy upgrade to move from one tool to another. So what my group was doing, because it was a startup and they had a very small doc team, was they were just creating everything in Microsoft Word. And then they would just save it as a PDF, and that would be distributed with all of the installations. At that time, there was no cloud. Everything was, you had to buy some sort of a server and upload the files onto there every time there was a patch. And then as part of that patch, you'd get the updated documents. So what Oracle wanted was us to have a similar document style. So there was another group that we were tangentially related to, and I got their documents. And even though they were using a different authoring tool, I was able to inspect the styles and attempt to mimic that in Word. So what I did was I came up with a good old-fashioned Word template with styles. So for the different headings, the paragraph styles, a note style, numbering style, that kind of thing. The other groups were using Arbor Text or FrameMaker, but we weren't given a budget to buy those or to switch our content to that. So we just stuck with Word. And the idea was we were going to stay in Word for the next 2 years until, a decision was made on the tool, and then we would all move to that. And that was in 2005. So in 2020, we moved to more than 2 years, we moved to other tools. So this is the story of that transition. If you look at this Word template sample that I have here, it's just, there's no real structure to it. It's just a bunch of headings and paragraphs in between them. Very basic style elements that we could adjust as needed. And this worked out pretty well because everyone was used to using Word. Like everyone I know has touched Word at some point in their lives, even my mom. So it wasn't too hard for them to say, oh, okay, let me just get the documentation file from the server and make my edits for the track changes on, and then save it back to the server, and then the doc team will review it. And what we have here is on the left, it's what it looks like in Word, and on the right is what it looks like when we save the PDF. And as you can see, they're pretty identical. It's a one-to-one. It was a easy setup because however it looked in Word is how it looked in the PDF. And that's a sort of a key point that I'm going to build into, in that it's a true WYSIWYG environment, because what you see is what you get. You make it look like this in Word, that's what it looks like in the PDF. If you make it look bad in Word, the PDF is going to look bad also. One of the benefits to Word, as I noted, was that there is edit tracking. And this was handy because we had a source control system. And in order to edit anything in that, you need a bug number. So we would have a bug that would say, update this guide. And we would have the SME, or the subject matter expert. And they would say, oh yeah, for this release, we added new functionality. And here's samples from my integration guide. And say, okay, well, here's what we added, new whatever's XSDs here. So they would go in and they write a little paragraph about the changes of their XSDs. They would save the file, they would check it into source control, they would flag the bug would come to me, I would then check out the document, review their edits using the edit tracking system, approve them, make more edits as needed, and check it back in. And we would do that for every single bug and every single task that came along. And this worked fairly well because everyone had Word. Sometimes people would say, I don't need Word, I'm going to use OpenOffice. That proved disastrous because OpenOffice would mess up the formatting, it would mess up the headers and the footers and stuff like that. So we had to put this big disclaimer in there to all the developers: do not use OpenOffice. But that was a small speed bump that we overcame fairly early in the process. So this worked well for our development process. The problem was it didn't work well for the end users. And there were some speed bumps for the developers too. Since the document was stored in the same content management system as the code, the developer's natural inclination was to use the diff tool. So if you've ever worked with code, you can do a diff. And what that does is it shows the differences between one version of the code and the next version of the code. So just like Word has that edit tracking feature, you can say, compare this version of a code file with the previous one, and you can see who inserted what lines into the code or removed lines. And so that way you can see what changed. Well, if you tried to do that with a Word document, it doesn't work because the Word document is not a text file. It's known as a binary file, and binary files cannot be parsed by simple text editors to do that diff. So every once in a while I get a programmer trying to make an edit and they do this diff and they completely screw up the file. and not understand what was going on. And that was a learning curve that was pretty easily overcome. But this was something that wasn't optimal, because they kept saying, well, we just want to do all the diffs in the tool that we're familiar with. We don't want to have to go into Word and compare different versions and stuff like that. So that was one downside to using Word as an authoring tool. The next one that I ran into, and this was a pet peeve of mine, is how styles work. So I am someone that strictly follows the styles when I'm editing. I make sure the styles are in there, they're in there correctly, they're applied throughout the document, and everything looks clean and consistent. However, when you have multiple people who are not tech writers and not as conscientious as some tech writers, they say, oh yeah, I've got this thing. You know what? I'm just going to copy it from the wiki, or I'm going to copy it from the design document, or I'm going to copy it from a website, and they just paste the content in there. And when they do that, the styles may keep the styles of the original document. They might not force it to use the styles defined in the template of that document. So you get halfway through the document and the normal font changes by going up 2 point sizes and changing to a different font. Or maybe it's declared that it's in French instead of English, so that messes up the spell check. Or maybe it has a random color declaration to not quite black, but almost black. Or maybe it's blue for some reason because they copied from a wiki where all the words were blue. And they don't care. They just paste it into the document. So what ended up being the bulk of my editing at the end of the release was to go through each document. And in Word, you can turn on all the granularity of the styles, and you can say, okay, well, here's normal, but normal set to be 11.5 point instead of 12, with a 1.2 spacing instead of 1.5 spacing, with an indentation of 0.5. And where is that? There's one paragraph where someone pasted that in. Okay, clean it up, make it normal, remove all that specialty stuff. So I would go through every document and go through every iteration of every variety of each style and make sure that they were all cleaned up and replaced with the generic style that I had defined. And that was somewhat time consuming, depending on how many people were editing the document and what their source content was. It wasn't hard to do, it was kind of fun, but it was also something that's like, oh, I just can't hit publish. I need to go and clean this up so it looks consistent style-wise. So the next point is there's no clean HTML conversion from Word. Word, sure, you can say save as HTML, and it makes an HTML file. But is it good HTML? It's okay. Are the pictures embedded properly? Well, they're in a subfolder or something, and maybe that kind of works on how you're distributing it as an HTML doc, but maybe it doesn't. And Oracle had very strict rules as to how the HTML had to be structured and where the files needed to live for images, and Word was not creating HTML as an output that matched any of those requirements. Two more problems with this procedure specific to PDFs. They're not particularly accessible for screen readers. So if you are contractually obliged to produce accessible documentation for the visually impaired, PDFs are not necessarily the best way to go, especially converting from Word. Maybe it works better if you're coming from FrameMaker or something like that, but from Word, the tables wouldn't read right through the screen readers. The text might not parse properly. It's just generally not a great transformation. And similarly, the contents of a PDF are a little black box. If you've got the title of it and you put it on a website, the website will index the title of the PDF, but it won't necessarily read inside the PDF and add to the search capabilities of that website for what is in the contents of that PDF. And this is bad for the end user, because if they're looking for a specific task or concept, it might be in one of my guides, like here's the integration guide, and it's got all this good content in there. But if they type in search for XSDs, it might not come up because it's not the title of the document. And the search indexer on the website doesn't know that it's inside of that PDF because it can't search inside of it. And people would have to, oh, well, maybe it's in this document, and then you have to download it. And most people have a PDF reader on their computer, but if not, they have to install, Adobe Acrobat Reader and search for themselves. Whereas everyone should just be able to click into the search window at the top of the website and say, give me this information, and expect to find it, not have to drill in and drill down and drill down and drill down to get to it. So these are some of the drawbacks that we faced to the old style presentation. Now, Oracle's solution to this was using DITA. And DITA stands for Darwin Information Typing Architecture. I have been using this for years and I still have no idea what that actually means, but it's an XML-based open standard for structuring, developing, managing, and publishing content, and it was designed by IBM. So instead of having your source file in Word, it's in an XML file, which is a text file, like a code file that the developers may use. And it was designed to reuse the content across multiple systems. So you could write something that is used in a guide, and it's also used in online help. It is also used in marketing materials, and it's all in one place in this XML file, and you can source that to any of those other outputs as needed in any combination of structuring. Now, DITA is a highly structured form of documentation, and it relies on XML tags. And I'll get more into this in a little bit, but the XML tags are similar to HTML tags, but they are very, very, very specific in how they work. You have a lot of fluidity in XML because you can make up your own tags as needed, but when using DITA, they have a set of tags which are already used and already structured a certain way, and you have to make sure that you're using them correctly. Otherwise, the XML is not well formed, as they call it, and then the page will not render properly. So it's an interesting way to categorize the content on a paragraph by paragraph basis within a topic that you've created. There are several editors that have been created to facilitate this. They usually provide some sort of a WYSIWYG, but you also will always be able to edit the XML directly with the tags if you want to. Some of the examples that I've used are Arbortext, XMetal, EasyDita, and Oxygen. FrameMaker should be on this list too, because that does XML to some extent. But my group was torn between Arbortext, which was the older standard, and the new standard is to use Oxygen. And that's what eventually, after, let's say, 15 years, they decided we should be going with. So this is what DITA looks like, sort of. So this is creating the table of contents for a document authored in DITA. And this is called a DITA map or a book map, depending on the style that you're using. And what you're doing here is each level of indent represents a different chapter in the book, which is a different heading. So I will point over here. So we have on the second tier here, the first part is the preface, which is the introduction. And this includes the structure of the table of contents right there. And then we've got chapter and chapter 1. And then here's the first heading in chapter 1. If we go down to chapter 2, there's a heading 1 here, and then there's a heading 2 there. So the way that you structure a document in DITA is not one big file like in Word. It is many little files all strung together, and you organize them in one of these book maps or DITA maps. And you can create multiple maps and put these topics together in any order that you want. So that's the idea of reusing the same content over and over again. And I will delve more into this in a moment. But this is the overview of how a table of contents and therefore a document is assembled piece by piece in DITA. So here we have a screenshot of one of my pages, and this is how it looks like in the editor. And this is the WYSIWYG editor in Oxygen, and it looks pretty much like Word. It doesn't have anything fancy. You can't change the font really. This is bolded, and then we just have the text. It's a bulleted list, you can see. You've got one title at the top. In DITA, you don't have sections the same way that you do in Word, because in Word you can have a heading 1 followed by a heading 2 followed by a heading 3 with all relevant content nested in between. In DITA, each heading represents its own topic, and if you want to have a subheading in there, that's where, and we teleport back to the previous slide, you can see we have, here's a heading 1, this would be a heading 2, heading 3, heading 4. As we nest down into it, each of these is a separate topic tied together through this map to structure and that's not a word, but make an equivalent of a heading. So each of these topic definitions is a heading, and whether it's an H2 or an H3 or an H4 depends on how far it's indented in the map. And I know this is kind of a tricky concept to illustrate, and I'm going to try and work through that so you guys can see it. So the concept there is each topic always has a title, and where you put it in the book map indicates whether this is an H1 or an H2 or an H3. In the editor, it always appears like an H1 up at the top. You can create sections too, which will make like an H2, but you can't have a section within a section within a section the way that you would in Word, because it's designed to have one concept or task per topic that you're creating. So this is a big change from Word, because in Word you say, oh, this is the document about the integration and everything goes in there, and you have a different chapter, sure, but it's all in the same document, unless you're creating a very, very large document combining them. But in my case, we were just creating straightforward documents with, maybe a dozen chapters and maybe 20 pages in each. And, it was manageable as one file in Word to do that. So here's what the WYSIWYG editor looks like. And it looks really great because you think you can just copy and paste stuff in. But what it's masking is the use of the XML tags. And as I indicated in the introduction, the tags to XML are very key to understanding how the content is structured. So here you can see here's a tag that says topic, and this is title. Every topic needs to have a title. And the WYSIWYG renders the title as large like that. Then you need a body section saying here's where the main content is. And each paragraph, like HTML, has paragraph tags. Here, just like HTML, here's an unordered list. And these are all line items or list items in that list. And here we have UI control to make it bold. And this is where, I touched on this later, but you might use a bold tag here instead. But my group is using UI control as the tag to indicate bolding because that's what they decided. I don't know, but that's just what I was told to do. So when you are working in this, you have to know where the tags are, because each tag has a set of values that can be valid inside of that. So I'll show you on the next slide. So here we are, we've got the tags turned on, and what I've done is I placed my cursor at the end of one of these line here. And when you press enter in Word, you just get a new paragraph and you start typing. When you press enter in a DITA authoring tool, it doesn't just give you a new line, because it doesn't know what tag to make that new line. And based on where that cursor is when you press enter, different tags may be available. So on this top image, I am within that line tag before the closing element for that, and I press enter. And here's, or maybe this is the one that's, no, the first one is outside. I spoke backwards. I'm sorry. This is outside of that line. So when I press enter, it says, oh, here are the available tags that will fit in there. And you probably, since you're creating a list, want to create a new line item, meaning add another bullet. But here are some of the other things that will fit in there. Okay, that's great. That's not hard to do. But if you have the cursor over one space and you're inside of that line tag, you can see from a line item, well, you can split that unordered list. You can make another bullet. You can add a comment, or you can add a processing instruction, both of which are internal type tags that the end user will probably not see. And you will see that abbreviated form is grayed out. That's not an option. So you can't nest some of those tags within the other tags. And when you have the tags visible, it's very easy to know where your cursor is, because you can see whether it is inside or outside of the tag elements, whether it's before or after this little triangular LI or outside of it. But if you have it so you don't have the tags turned on and it just looks like this, you may think that you clicked at the end of the line, but you don't know whether you're inside of that tag or outside of that tag unless you look very carefully at the footer and it'll show you where it is. But you might think, oh, I'm going to hit a new line, and then it doesn't give you that option. Or when it does, it makes it a nested bullet because you created it within the same bullet. So even though there's a WYSIWYG that looks all pretty like this, I find it more useful to have these tags visible so you know where the cursor is, so you know which options it will give you when you create a new line item for new content. So that was a speed read of general tag usage in Word, or not in Word, in Oxygen and XML. Are there any questions on that? I know, I mean, this is just a general concept of the structure of how XML DITA works and with the editors, and it's a little tricky, and I tried to illustrate it with examples, but please, if you have questions, let me know. I'm not seeing the chat, so if there is something in there, I don't.
I don't know if you want to get into Tim right now. We do have a couple of questions about the rationale of using Oxygen and using it as a standalone or embedded CCMS. Do you want to address those now, or do you want to wait till the
Why don't I do that? Save those for the end, because those are more general questions, not specific to this section of it. And some of the questions may be answered by my ensuing presentation.
Fantastic? Then I think we're ready to go on then.
Okay. So this part, as I said, is converting from Word. So creating a new document, one section at a time. So the problem with converting from Word is in Oxygen is you just can't say, oh, open up Word file in Oxygen, and then suddenly have manageable and usable DITA. It doesn't know how to break it up. It doesn't, there's no magic silver bullet import button that we were able to figure out. And here's an example. Okay, let me try and import the integration guide that I was using as a sample. It created a really interesting file structure to accommodate that, and it created one file for the entire content in the entire document. And it gives you a warning about that because it's unwieldy. And when it does that, it brings it all in, but it loses all of the formatting, the setup, the structure. It makes it all a big flat file, which is not optimal because you obviously want to maintain your formatting, your structure, your headings, all that stuff. It didn't do that. So, well, I guess you could do this and then retroactively reapply all that information. Our team decided to not do that because that would be more of a headache to flip back and forth. So what we did was simply copy each, maybe a couple paragraphs or sections, paste it into Oxygen on a topic by topic basis, and then apply the tags. You know, I alluded to this earlier. When you copy it in, it tries to guess what the tags are. So, okay, this looks like you're ending a paragraph, so we'll put the paragraph tags around this content here. So that looks like a paragraph, and this looks like a list. And sometimes the list would come in okay. And sometimes if they were nested too many times, not so great. And then, as I mentioned earlier, there's this UI control. Well, those came in as bold tags. And when I would build these in the document construction tool that Oracle has, none of the words were coming in as bold. And here I talked to them, and in their style sheet, they don't use the bold tag, which I thought was kind of weird, but they use UI control instead, which is a different tag, obviously. And it's not hard to go in and select the bold and then change the tag to be UI control. And it bolds it here anyway as a default. But it's just something that is time consuming because every time you paste something, you need to make sure the correct tags are automatically being applied, and then you have to manually change it. Same with code paragraph, I guess that is, but it looks like code def to me. That's for when you want to have a mono-spaced font, such as when you're using code jargon or something like that, or a code line that's embedded. Make sure that it's coming in as that and not as some other sort of tag that doesn't render properly. So this is one step that you have to go through because you need to make sure all of the tags are in the right place, at the right tags, and everything is structured properly, because otherwise the document will fail to build itself. We need to learn how to cut things into small pieces. And I alluded to this earlier because every single heading needs to be a title. And in order to have a title, you can only have one title per topic. So that means, and this is a shot from the Word document, that this first part here, the W3C schema version, that is one topic. It's all of 2 lines. And here's the XML schema changes. It's all of 1 sentence. And here's another one. this is a couple paragraphs that's a little bit more manageable. So what you need to think about is, do you need to transfer it following and mirroring the exact structure that was there in the Word document? Because what is very easy to do in Word with a one sentence section, it's probably not the best structure overall for something, because does one sentence need its own section? Is this really that big of a concept? Maybe it's not. So you need to figure out how to break this stuff down. So here's an example. We've got a heading 3, a heading 3, a heading 3, a heading 2, and another heading 3. So what this ends up turning into is, in your data map, and this is a simplified version of the book map or the data map, you've got, a heading 2, a heading 3, a heading 3, a heading 2, a heading 3. This one, as I noted before, it's just 2 lines. We have the topic, the title, the body, because everything's in the body of it, a paragraph with an XREF or an HTML link, and then another paragraph just with the code information. So you create one file with just this information, and then you add it up here to what is equivocally your table of contents, but it is your book map or data map to structure that out. And you have to do that for every section. So while you're looking at this in Word, you're like, oh, this isn't even one page. It's really 1, 2, 3, 4 topics, plus this content down there, which is this whole nother ball of wax. So you're not just copying and pasting all this. You have to create a new topic, put it in the right place, name it with a good unique file name, add this content to it, save it, add it to the book map, lather, rinse, repeat for each of these. So while it looks like you can say, oh, let me just grab that, you need to figure out whether you need to even keep it that structure. Maybe you can put in a generic title here and just have stuff flowing below that. Maybe you don't need all of these sections, because otherwise you end up with 100 different files for one document, which is perfectly fine. So here, this is the next section of the book map, and we've got viewing the XML schemas, and this is just another sample of, okay, this is the second line that's here. It looks like I've decided to take out that third subsection, but this one is the larger body there, and this all fits nicely. You can see I've got the UI control, I've got an XREF in here, and the rest of it is just paragraphs. So that's not too bad. And we've added it to the book map. And the last part is sections without text, because what we have here is we've got transmission schema, and that's immediately followed by a heading called schema files. Now, you can do a couple of things here. You can either structure it so there's not a subheading called schema files, and this content just falls under transmission schema, but maybe that doesn't work because maybe there are a dozen subsections in here, and this truly is just for schema files. And you don't want to have just a filler sentence saying this is the section on transmission schemas, because that doesn't add value. So what we've done here is I've created something called a topic header, and that, see how it's got like a different little icon there? That just means that there's not a topic for this, but it's just in the table of contents that shows up as the H2, just like that one does, even though there's no content in it. And then you can make a file that's the schema files and nest that under there. So that way you're not creating a blank topic. It's just a sneaky workaround so you don't have blank topics. And if at some point we came up with content to put in between the words transmission schema and the schema files, we could easily create a topic and put that content in there. But in the meantime, you're not creating a blank topic that's taking up file space and making your file management that much more hairy to deal with. So once you have all of these things, and you do this as you go, you build the book map or the DITA map. And what we have here is we've got chapter 2. This is a chapter definition in the book map, and this is like the mini version of it that we've been working off of on the left. And then we have a topic reference, and this is a topic that's called definitions. Here's another topic ref, integration XML schemas, and then here's a brand new topic that we had just created, those two sub ones that I demonstrated. And when I put them into the map, I indented them. So you can see they're inside of, like, this topic ref tag on the right, that's the closing tag for this one. So because this tag and this tag occur within that tag, they are indented, meaning that we've got a heading 1 for the chapter title, a heading 2, a heading 2, and heading 3. There's nothing in the XML of each of those topics that says heading 1, heading 2, heading 3. But by virtue of where it is placed in this book map, and therefore the table of contents, you'll see heading 1, heading 2, heading 3. That's how it renders in the output. So how do we get the output? Oxygen has several canned outputs. This is a screenshot of their default ones. It can be anything you want. You can make a PDF, you can make HTML5, you can even make a Word file if you want. You want a book going to a Kindle? Sure, go for it. An old-fashioned chum file, maybe an EPUB using Markdown. You can generate it however you want. And in order for this generation to work, the tool goes through every single file that you've indicated in the book map. You may have created 100 files, but if they're not in the book map, they're not considered. So it's taking the book map or the DITA map that you've created and saying, what files are you using? That is what we're going to put into the output. And do those files stand up? So it looks at that HTML and that XML that's in there, and it says, are all the tags correct? Is there a start tag? Is there an end tag? Are all of the tags used in the right spot? No, you can't have a section tag within a bulleted list. That is incorrect. It's going to fail, and it'll give you warnings and say, this is poorly formatted. This is not going to process right. And that will, as part of this process, kick back any errors. And you can search for the errors without trying to generate as well. There are, there's a review tool and stuff like that. But that is also, of course, replicated whenever you try and generate something. Now, my group, we don't generate within Oxygen. Oracle has created its own generation system, so that way they can control the style definitions. So when we generate the XML, they control the styles. All I have to do is provide to them the DITA files. And for that, I take the DITA files, and my group uses Subversion as the source control just for these documents, because that's what ties in with their building tool. So when I'm done editing in Oxygen, I commit everything in Subversion. I go to a web page that runs the build tool. And I say, okay, here's my document, check that off. And I say print. And it reads those XML files from the source control in Subversion, and it generates an output. And this is a sample of the HTML output of the pages that we just worked on. Well, I pretended to work on in this demonstration. And you can see that the font doesn't match anything like in the editor. The colors are different. The spacing is different in the layout. Here's the bold. In this, the URLs are an off shade of blue. It's not the traditional URL blue, but it's the one that they're branding Oracle with. They've got the H2 here is in a different font, and it's green. Here's the H3, which is a slightly smaller version of that font. You can see they included some spacing before the H2. And the bulleted lists appear all in green for reasons that I don't know, but that's how they want it. And then at the same time, it builds a PDF, because we still distribute the PDFs, because sometimes a client just wants to download a PDF and print it out or have it on their device to read. And, that way you get pages and chapter headings at the top, and it looks pretty much the same. For some reason in PDF, they decided to have the links be orange instead of blue. I'm not sure why. And they put some more spacing before the H3s than they did in the other one. And here the bullet dots are green, but the text is in regular black, but it's otherwise pretty much the same. And if they fix this, I don't have to do anything. If they say we're making a whole new style sheet, I don't have to do anything, because my content doesn't need to change. How they process it when we make the output. So they could apply a totally different style sheet to it, and all I need to do is click print, and it comes out in that new style sheet. I don't have to change anything in my XML for that. So the moral of the story, lessons learned on how to prepare to move to DITA. Problems to overcome, and this requires a good hat. There we go. So some of the problems that we had to worry about: content moving to XML. The collaborators are often developers. How do they edit this? Now, on one hand, they may be familiar with using XML already. However, they are most likely not familiar with using DITA. I work in, obviously, so the integration guy, I work with a guy whose main job is doing the integrations using XML. And he says, oh, I live, breathe, eat, sleep XML. Let me just edit the documents. I said, okay, here's the folder. And he said, what the heck is this? I am not touching this. Only said it with a Scottish accent. You can edit this. So how do we recreate that environment that I had before where a Word doc was in source control and developers could make their edits and then I could approve them and work from there, but using DITA because the developers do not have Oxygen as an editing tool. What do? So my solution was I used that Oxygen output tool to make a Word document. Formatting doesn't matter as long as the document is complete. Then I would put that back out into a shared drive and the developers would then edit the content in that shared drive with the track changes on. Then I would go back and make the changes in the DITA files. This is not as optimal or speedy because you need to double your work because you're doing it in two places. However, it is effective. So that is a drawback in that the authoring end of this and the working with the developers and the other subject matter experts is slowed down in the transfer to the DITA because I need to make the changes to the DITA myself and I need to reconcile that against whatever they put in the Word document. So that is the process that we came up with, and it works pretty well. It just doubles the amount of time roughly that you need to work on to do this. Main drawback for just switching right to Oxygen, as I indicated, is that there's no easy way to import it from Word. Everything needs to be manually copied in section by section. The tags need to be reviewed. The structure needs to be reviewed. The good news is when you do that, you might find stuff that doesn't need to be there or is poorly structured earlier, and you can rewrite that, edit it out, restructure it, make it flow better. So we did have a good deal of cleanup in the guides when we did this because it was more of a top-down review than we were having in previous iterations. Because After Doc's been there for 15 years, how closely do people review all of it for every release? Hopefully closely, but not always the case. You say, hey, how does this look? Does anything change? Yeah, nothing changed there. Then like, oh my God, we forgot to add this. Yeah, that happens no matter how much you ask. Another step to overcome is learning how to use Oxygen. Like I said, it is fairly easy to use. It is mostly a WYSIWYG, but the whole concept of how to add those tags and how to copy and paste it and how to edit with the tags and move the text around, there's definitely a learning curve there. I would say Oxygen makes it pretty easy, but it's not as easy as moving content around in Word. It's definitely easier than moving around in Arbor text based on my experience with that product. But it's not, you're not just editing it in Word the way that it was. However, we do have some good benefits to this. We are able to create the content in multiple formats relatively easily because once you create that baseline data and you generate it, whatever that generation tool is doing, it puts it however you want, and you don't have to worry about it once that is configured. The HTML output is much closer to meeting accessibility standards because HTML reads very well when it's structured properly with a screen reader. The HTML output is indexed on a website. So when people go to our documentation website and they type in the search bar, show me about XSDs in this product, it'll find that page of the integration guide right where where those words occur, as opposed to saying, oh, it's probably in this PDF that you'll have to download and search for manually. It'll bring them right to the correct content. Also, the output looks nicer and is more consistent across all the documents that Oracle is producing. So if everyone is using this tool, all the documents match that output style. Whereas Oracle is so big and you have the different acquisitions, you go to someone's doc and maybe they have something where they've got a 3/4 margin on the left side and the text is already scrunched on the right because there's leading headers leading into that. And then you look at someone else's document and they have the complete opposite where they don't have it at all. This way, there's more of a combined look and feel across all of the content in the Oracle documentation system. And this is the conclusion where I'm going to stop talking. Here's my contact information, which has already been shared, although the T was missing from the beginning of my email address if you want. That was in the chat originally. So now we've got questions and answers, and I can take off this hat.
So Tim, we have one question in the chat that I want to touch on before we go too far into the general ones is, do you have experience including images from the Word file, such as screenshots, into Oxygen?
Yes, I did not include that, but I can do that for a future iteration. So what we had to do with the images was we would save the images as a PNG, and in the folder structure in Oxygen, well, the folder structure on the server that we were using, which is, well, the local computer that is tied to the Subversion check-in, you create a folder and we named it, images, and we put the PNGs in there. Then you can easily insert the PNGs into Oxygen and say whether they're flush left, and you can put in alt text and sizing to scale it to fit and that kind of stuff. So that wasn't too hard to do. This did give us the opportunity to review the images that were in the Word documents, because as having multiple authors across multiple documents over multiple years, someone inserts a flowchart in one document and it uses blue lines and rounded corners on the diagrams, and the other one uses black lines and straight corners and a different font. This gave us the opportunity to review all of those sort of images and recreate them. We just made them in PowerPoint using the same template. So that way, all of the images were now consistent across the documents using the same look and feel and color system. That was a good exercise to standardize such things and to call out, this is a really bad picture. Why is this in here? And they'll say, I don't know, because the guy that edited before me had it in there. Well, that's not the reason to have it in there. Let's make a new one. Let's remove it, etc. But in general, embedding them was not hard. It was just saying, okay, insert media. And where does the file live? Point to where the file lives. And it inserts the media. And then you can configure it size-wise and location, that sort of thing.
So I like this question, and this one's from Bobby. Is what was the most painful aspect of this conversion for you guys?
I think it was just really time consuming to copy and paste everything and review the tags. It wasn't hard. It was kind of a Zen thing to do, but you needed to be paying attention while you were doing it, because otherwise you get those bold tags in there, which we're not using, and then you generate the output and half the things are bolded and half of them are not because the tag's not right. So just the general, like, how do I structure this? Because in the Word document, we had a heading 2 and a heading 3 and a heading 4 all in one row. Okay, but that doesn't make sense with the DITA conversion. So how can we restructure the content to capture the feel of this, but make it flow better with the DITA structure? So it was kind of a reorganization of the content on a paragraph by paragraph basis. So just the time sink of doing that was probably the most painful, because you couldn't be like, oh, this is a 50-page document. I'll be done in an hour. Well, it depends on how that document was written originally. It might be a straight up conversion, or maybe you spend a day and a half on it because it was really put together in a wacky way.
I can relate to that because my team is migrating from unstructured to structured content right now using some different software and tools, but that level of needing to refine everything and touch every paragraph and every sentence and review everything, it is a massive time sink.
Exactly. We were fortunately given a good enough amount of time and enough people on my team to adequately do this. But then we run into the situation where, well, person over here didn't use the subject headings the same way the person over there did. Maybe they didn't do this. And so we had to, double check each other that we were processing the documents in the same sort of structure.
That about wraps up our time. So I'd like to take a minute now and thank Tim for this wonderful presentation. Okay, coming in. Yes, the recording will be available later, and I'm going to say later in a general sense because I don't know exactly when they're available. I need some time to get it posted to our share drive. Bobby, are they available automatically?
No, I think that there is a process, but it won't be very long.
Okay. There is, I'll drop it in the link again. There is a survey to take, and Elizabeth, I apologize. I did not drop the survey in your presentation. But through this survey, you can get to, I believe, surveys for all of the presentations at STC. So please provide our presenters with some feedback and enjoy the rest of Spectrum. Tim, thank you again so much for your time and your presentation.
Sure. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out to me in any of the methods that are on the screen now. and ask away, and we can have our own dialogue, or use the STC Slack, the STC community Slack, or the one for this conference as well. You can reach me in any of those if you want to have a little dialogue.
Excellent. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you, Tim. This was great.
Thank you. My pleasure.
You.
Thanks a lot.